Hello, and welcome to part 12 of the series on deductive logic. This is philosophy 8. Today we're going to talk about categorical syllogisms. And this is from chapter 5, which is the last 5 chapters we'll be reading this semester from Patrick Hurley's book. Here you see the LA Southwest College special edition, only the first 5 chapters, but the 12th edition will work well on the same page. Okay. Well, today's lecture is going to build on some prior concepts. First of all, the syllogism. Secondly, validity, that single most important concept in all of deductive logic. Third, the standard form of the categorical proposition. And last, techniques for marking the Venn diagrams. So this is all review. If you need to go back and catch up a little bit, chapter 1 for the first 2 and chapter 4, the last. But please be sure that you do have these under your belts before you start today's lecture, before you continue with today's lecture, obviously, and it'll go a lot better. All right, the categorical syllogism, what is it? It is a deductive argument consisting of 3 categorical propositions capable of being translated into standard form. So we know what standard form propositions are now. Standard form syllogism is simply a syllogism of, guess what, 3 standard form categorical propositions, rocket science. And we're going to work with categorical syllogisms in that form only. One could tweak it a bit if one wanted. There is a standard form for categorical syllogisms, just like, and for the same reason that there is a standard form for the individual categorical propositions. Categorical syllogism is in standard form when all 4 of the following conditions are met. First of all 3 propositions are standard form categoricals. Second, the 2 occurrences of each term are identical, no paraphrasing. Third, each term is used in the same sense, no equivocation going on. It's also called the Four Terms Fallacy. And last, fourth and last, the major premise is first, the minor premise is second, conclusion is last. So, for example, consider the following syllogism. Nobody is very important, but I'm nobody. I must be very important. What was the joke? If I'm impotent, if I'm impotent, I'm going to act impotent. The term nobody is equivocal because the same term is used in a different sense in the first premise than in the second. We looked at this example before in talking about the fallacy of equivocation. I can prove to you that you're in Philadelphia because either you're in Philadelphia or you're somewhere else, but you're not somewhere else, you're here. Therefore, you must be in Philadelphia. This both paraphrases and equivocal. Remember, equivocation was an informal fallacy. Well, here's our Four Terms Fallacy when you're using a term in an equivocal way. Instead of getting the M term, which ordinarily be here, we have 2 different terms, B and A, and they're treated as if they were identical, when in fact not. When used in a categorical syllogism, this becomes a formal fallacy. Since a categorical syllogism needs 3 terms, it violates the rules by using 4 instead. Terms A and B ought to be one identical term, normally M, when in fact they're 2 separate. And we looked again at Shakespeare in the way in which he parodies this kind of logic chopping equivocation, as he called it. This is also what made Bacon. Well, I can prove to you that Stevie Wonder is God. Major premise, God is love. Minor premise, love is blind. Therefore, Stevie Wonder is God. No, he isn't. Charles Mingus is God. And normally at this point in the face-to-face lectures, I play the clip from Mingus. Apparently, Facebook, Facebook too, won't allow that for certain pieces, but the same pieces you can actually go directly to YouTube and view or listen to. So I don't know. If you want to take a break here, go listen to some Charles Mingus, guys. Okay. Consider this example, this famous one, Barbara example. All men are mortal, all Socrates are men, therefore all Socrates are mortal. Now remember our standard form categorical propositions. They had a quantifier, they had a subject term, they had a predicate term, and a copula. So I've arranged the syllogism in this format as well. In the above, mortal is the major term. Socrates is the minor term. The major term is the predicate term. of the conclusion. The minor term is the subject term of the conclusion. That's something you memorize. And we'll see that that's going to help us out when we try to fill in these syllogisms. So men is the middle term. The middle term is the term that occurs once in each premise, but never in the conclusion. So you've got three terms, and each of the three terms occurs twice in the syllogism. The subject term and predicate term, both in the conclusion, and the subject term once in a premise, the predicate term of the conclusion once in a premise, and the middle term once in each of the premises, but never in the conclusion. Technically, each proposition is in standard form, but we're going to assign S as the subject term and P as the predicate term for the conclusion, and then arrange the other terms accordingly. So they're not going to look squeaky clean, but it will, for intents and purposes, the same thing. We know we're going to have quantifiers first. We're going to have copulous linking. So we're going to put S and P, respectively, as the subject term and predicate term of the conclusion. But where do we place the middle term? Where does M go? Well, the only requirement is to occur in the premises, but not in the conclusion. However, there are four possible slots here for occurrences of that term. So how do we choose out of those four? In this concrete example, the middle term, which is men, it's a term that occurs once each, but only in the premises, is placed as the subject term of the major premise and the predicate term of the minor premise. Okay, that's one example. But this is only one of a number of possible placements. This brings us to the topics of figure and mood. Okay. Just as the vowel names A, E, I, and O give a discrete identifier for each of the four standard form categorical propositions, figure and mood are going to do the same thing. They're going to be discrete identifiers for this time 256 categorical syllogisms. There are that many. That's why when we first tackled the concept of validity, we did so with the conditionals, which only have four, rather than the categoricals, which have 250. Now we're coming back, and we're going to have some techniques to deal with the categoricals in all their complexity, but we're going to start soon. Okay, let's go back. Let's use the syllogism again. And we're going to give it an identifier. Now the identifier is AAA-2. That is to say, its mood is AAA, AAA, and its figure is 2. So that's mood and figure. Mood first, figure second. Figure is the number. And this is the only syllogism that can be identified by that designation, AAA2. And AAA2 only identifies one. Okay, AAA2, whatever could that mean? Well, again, I mentioned terms of art before. Logic. In logic, validity is a basic term of art. But I mentioned in the last lecture, distribution, also a term of art, and here we have two more, figure and mood. Again, they have ordinary meanings in colloquial speech, not the same meaning that they have technically here. Mood is another one of those terms of art. It doesn't mean what it does in ordinary language. Here's what it means. Mood refers to the type of categorical proposition used, as AEIRO, used in each place in the syllogism, as well as the order in which they're arranged. So if we look at this is the Barber syllogism 1, the first proposition is an A proposition, and so the second, and so is the third. So we say that the mood of this is AAA, triple A if you like. So all three propositions are A statements. That's why what we call it. Take this example. Some men are mortal. No Socrates are men. Therefore, all Socrates are mortal. Well, okay. Which is the quantifier in the major premise? It's the I proposition, which is the quantifier of the I proposition. Okay. And E, the quantifier is no, which is the quantifier for the E proposition, and in the conclusion, all, which is A. So the mood of this one is IEA instead of AAA as the previous one. Okay, one of those terms of art, and we see the differences here according to the different kinds of propositions now. But didn't we already know that figure had something to do with mood? Okay, figure is also a term of art. This one denotes the relative arrangement of the middle term, and there are four possibilities. So I've circled them here. So you can see figure 1 has the middle term occurring as the premise in the subject term in the first premise, but the predicate term in the second. Whereas figure 2 has the middle term occurring as the predicate term in both premises, whereas figure 3 has middle term as the subject term in both. And finally, figure 4 does kind of the reverse of what figure 1 does. It has the middle term as the conclusion of the major premise, predicate of the minor premise. And of course, we are still the subject predicate terms. The conclusion wrong. Now you can see we've put circles on them, but we can put lines like this to show the relative arrangement. And this is pretty intuitive. The only counterintuitive thing about this, it's a little quirky, you got to remember, but I think, well, notice first of all, the figure 2, the middle terms are lined up in a slot, so to say. They're lined up on the right side, but then it's like they jump back to the left side in figure 3, whereas I think intuitively we probably want to say, okay, so we're moving left to right, and so we think that the middle term is going to be right, but it isn't. And the only thing that's possibly confusing, although it's pretty straightforward. I don't know if you've ever played American football, but I remember, Saturday mornings after the Friday night high school game, coach would get us together and bring the chalkboard out, and we'd do these kinds of diagrams and analyze the previous night play. And a lot of people do this anyway, fantasy football, all that stuff. So you've got a middle term either lining up in the slot or offset, if you want to think of it that way. Mr. Hurley uses what's a common use of the shirt collar model, as he calls it. Think about the lines intersecting that show the arrangement of the middle terms, and they look kind of like a shirt collar, with a necktie in the middle. And that's fine if you want to think about it that way. That's an easy mnemonic device just to pop up in your head. The only quirk, of course, is that you've got to cross the shirt to get finished 2 and 3 in it. Kind of joke to yourself. Don't try this at home, kids. I'm a trained professional. But consider an alternative mnemonic. Have you ever seen kids in elementary school learning how to count or add or subtract using blocks or other physical objects? They call these manipulatives. Well, the strategy comes about as a result of educational research back into the late 60s into what's called different learning modalities, Howard Gardner and so forth at Harvard, and multiple intelligences and so forth. So, somebody may have a visual modality. They do best when they see things on the chalkboard, etc. But other people do better with auditory modality. They can learn better when they hear an explanation rather than when they try to read it. And then there's some people supposedly this is the line that's out of research up with. There's a kinesthetic modality. Some people learn better by doing it, by putting motion in their act. Yeah. By the way, this kind of thing has been around in educational psychology for more than a half century now. It is not uncontroversial. It has been challenged. Is there any such thing? Modalities, but these are the typical ones. And of course, if you go through a teacher training program in K through 12, you have this, drilled and killed into you. Quite penetrated quite so far in higher education. There's the visual modality, based on observation, reading, doing math problems in a workbook, or the auditory, based on listening, tends to be disdained in the era of short attention spans, but then I guess the visual reading would be as well. Kinesthetic, based on hands-on work, motor activity, equivalents in the previous photo. Doing. Now, some people can be book smart, but not street smart, or not people smart, and some people be people smart, but not book smart, etc. Why smart women make bad choices. Read cred? How do I get it? Proponents of learning modalities tend to suggest that modalities are mutually exclusive and that effective learning for all will occur only when the whole range of learning modalities is addressed, not just, for instance, the auditory or visual. As teachers like to do talk and talk. This is an old criticism, goes back to John Dewey about a century ago, but who like to do that kind of thing usually heavily criticized by proponents of the learning modalities. Reason. Presumably, some children are better prepared to learn basic concepts of addition and subtraction if they have something hands-on kinesthetically, rather than just visualizing problems on a page or hearing teacher talk about it. Well, and if you do take the teacher training regimen in K-12 programs, you have it drilled into you that you must constantly address all of these modalities, or else I think it's not taking place, falling behind, because everyone has the same learning style, and so not everybody's needs are being addressed. Okay, you can see the example, you can see the point with elementary math. Possibly there will be some difference when some students can use manipulatives as opposed to adding up figures on a piece of paper, but it's got to have its limits too. Should we read about the Battle of Waterloo, or should we supply the kinesthetic students with black powder muskets and say, go there and shoot it out on that vacant lot? We can't do all modalities with all things, And I guess we shouldn't worry. I hope we shouldn't worry too much about that in higher ed. Public school simplification isn't going to work. Every subject on higher education. Oops. I had to bring Play-Doh to class today, and I brought Play-Doh. Flip up Play-Doh probably wouldn't be helpful. This, of course, can be parodied. The Onion, which is a satirical newspaper, it's now there's an online version too, had an article on nasal learners. And there's a new modality that's been discovered. Some students learn best only by sense of smell. And of course, the parents of the nasal learners are really up in arms that their factory students are not being, having their needs met. Onion is really quite funny, but the danger is that some people don't understand satire. They did, for example, they named Kim Jong-un the sexiest man alive for 2012. And the official Chinese newspaper, the People's Daily, the online version, picked it up and ran it as a straight news story. So, joke alert, folks. Anyway, what I'm getting down to is all a shaggy dog story. But here's another mnemonic device if you want to use it. Mr. Hurley has the shirt collar model. I'll offer the ballet model. My wife, who was a former ballerina, just cringes me say this. But you could put your feet together. So figure one is a position where you got one foot splayed out, left foot splayed out, right foot ahead. Then you hop. Okay, I can't do it here on the screen. You hop with 2 feet together, straight up, and then this takes care of that little quirk. You hop back in the other direction, 2 feet still together, and then fourth position, hop with the right foot this time. So if I see anybody in the middle of the exam getting up and hopping around, that's okay. I'll understand what. Nice. However you do it, by whichever mnemonic device or not, memorize these 4 figures, because these are going to have to come trippingly off the tongue. Okay, you're going to need to recognize them. You're not going to be able to do the Venn diagrams, and of course, that is a key test for validity. You're not going to be able to do that key test for validity unless a figure, mood, boom, boom, boom. Memorize the moods, memorize the figures. It'll save you some trouble and effort later. So therefore, it would be fair game on an exam to ask, let's say, give you a syllogism, you tell me it's figure and mood. It's A, I, O, choose. Or in a multiple choice setting to say, okay, figure denotes what? Multiple choice, answer the order in which the middle terms are arranged, designated by 1, 2, 3, 4. Matching terms and definitions, that quality of a categorical syllogism designated by the 3 vowels which describe its 3 propositions. Mood. And given the figure is 1 and the mood is AAA, construct a syllogism using S for Socrates, P for modal, M for men. All those would be fair game. Sort of the last one. That's going to be a major kind of question. We'll work on Venn diagrams present. Okay. Figure and mood, though, together are important. Just one by itself isn't going to do the job. Let's see you want to send me a letter. Okay, so you got my name and you've got my zip code and my city, and you know I live on West 11th Place, but you just neglect to include the house number. Well, okay, maybe my postman will remember where I live and kind of figure it out. But really, you need not only the street, you need not only the mood, so to say, you need the figure, you need the number. Maybe not in every country. In Japan, for example, streets don't have names. They're divided into blocks. On each block, the houses are numbered, but they're not numbered in linear order. Rather, they're numbered in the order in which they were built, particular block. So, okay. Taxi cab drivers have a different job in Tokyo than they do in Los Angeles. But here, for the postman, for the taxi driver, etc., Uber, Lyft, combination of house number with street address provides a discrete identifier for each and every building. And this is what keeps everybody confused. So figure mood likewise provides the necessary level for discussing all of our 256 categorical syllogisms. Okay, so now combining figure and mood, we get a discrete identifier to denote each and every one of these 200 categorical syllogisms. Here's our Barbara, AAA1. By the way, Barbara, who's Barbara? Why do we call it Barbara? Well, the Barbara syllogism is named because the 3 letters of the figure correspond to the 3 vowels in the name. So why not just come up with 255 other names for all the rest and refer to them by personal name? Here's the good news. We're not going to go all medieval. Figure and mood are shortcuts to avoid unnecessary memorization. I told you a couple of basic things you got to memorize, but not everything. And the reason I mention this is because in the Middle Ages, if you were a logic student, yes, you had to memorize at least the personal names of the valid ones, but each and every one, including the invalid ones. Of course, there are many, many, many more invalid categorical syllogisms than there are valid ones. But still, that's a lot of names to memorize. Figure and mood, which is what we do in the modern era, is much simpler, much more analytic, much more transparent way to keep track of all 250. Okay? Probably even put the monks to sleep. If you look closely, you'll see that both of these tables, the medieval one to the right, the modern one below, say exactly the same thing. There are 15 unconditionally valid categorical syllogisms and 9 conditionally valid ones valid are in italics. The medievalist down below the modern ones. Unlike the medieval table, the modern one is not for memorization. But if not, how do we determine which syllogisms are valid? And the answer is, unless we happen to recognize them from past experience, Barbara always comes readily to mind, but all the other names do. We can always apply a ready analytic test for validity, and this is in the form of a Venn diagram. This is going to involve an expansion of the basic techniques you already learned in the last lecture, last chapter, using the Venn to translate verbal categorical propositions into pictures. The modern table then becomes available to you as a check on your application of the Venn techniques. You might want to go back as you're learning to do the Venns and say, okay, I think I've shown that this one is valid. Is this in fact one of the ones we know to be valid? Okay. Correct. Incorrect. Now we're getting just a little bit ahead of the game. Okay, so it ain't the Olympics. Remember, we're not going to do any more than 3 circles. Don't get to 5 circles, but get ready to sweat a little bit in the Venn diagram gymnasium. It's going to be uncomfortable and awkward and strange at first. The more you do it, the more you catch on. Riding a bicycle. Okay, no gain, but we can make it a little less painful than otherwise it might be. Before you can draw the Venn diagrams for syllogism, once again, be sure you're solidly grounded in figure and mood. In particular, be sure if given syllogism, you can extract its figure and mood, and if given a figure and mood, you can construct it into a syllogism. You can go both ways. Find yourself having trouble doing this with the Venn diagrams, you might want to go back to that. Otherwise, these points of preparation are important because in order to draw the Venns, you have to know first the figure and mood and the syllogistic form for the argument you're going to draw. Okay, first item above is easy. By now you should know how to read figure and mood off any syllogism, for example, or one we've seen before. All fish are swimmers, all Michael Phelps are swimmers, and therefore all Michael Phelps are. Well, first of all, we can see what the figure is there, right? Figure has to do with how the middle terms line up. What are the middle terms? The terms that occur once in each of the premises in the conclusion. So we can see the subject term of the conclusion is Michael Phelps. The predicate term is fish. Predicate term is the major term, so it occurs also in the major premise. Michael Phelps, subject term of the conclusion, also the minor term, so it occurs in the minor premise. And then we have swimmers. Swimmers occurs in both of those. And think of the 4 figures. Which one is that? That's number 2. Remember? Number 1's at a slant, 2 lines up, number 3 lines up, other way around, and then flat. So the quantifiers are all in all, A, and A. That's our mood. And so put it together with figure and mood. What's the name of this syllogism? This is the AA2 syllogism. Now, we'll come back to this. We're going to compare them with the Barbara, because obviously the similarity is they're both AAA, but the figure makes a big difference, whether it's figure 1 or figure 2 in this case. Now, suppose as in the second item, all you have is figure and mood. So now you need to unzip this information to construct. And here you don't need to identify the terms beyond S, P, and M, but you need to know where they go. So if I were to say to you, instead of here's a syllogism already constructed, give me the figure and mood. Suppose I give you the figure and mood and say, you construct the syllogism. So take EIO1, okay, the name. Well, then first task to do is to, oops, right. Okay, is to work out where the terms go in the syllogism. And I'll take you through this step by step. And we will go through examples of this for a number of the different moods. First thing I would do, there are 4 slots that need to be filled in each of the propositions. You've got the quantifier, the standard form, quantifier, subject term, copula, predicate term. Okay, the copula is always the same, always the third person plural verb to be, the word are, in other words. So when I do these things, I always put that in first. That's the easiest bit, and I'm lazy, so I always like the easiest bit first. I don't know about you. I would recommend it. Laziness, not a bad thing. Okay. Second, I know that S and P are going to be the subject and predicate term of the conclusion, respectively. Okay, good. Goes in. Then the next thing is I'm not going to know where to put the major and minor terms in the premises until I first know where the middle term goes. That eliminates where they could go. So the third thing I would do is put the middle term in, and since the figure is number 1, that tells me to put the middle term as the subject term of the major premise and the predicate term of the minor. So that's there. And then we know the P term, the major term, goes to the major premise. The S, the minor term, goes to the minor premise. And the last thing to do is to put in the quantifiers, and that's given to me by the mood, right? So E, I, and O, the quantifier for E is no, the quantifier for I is some, and the quantifier for O is some not. So voila, look what you get there. No M or P, some S are M, some S are not P. Okay, you've just followed out what the discrete identifier tells you, and you've unpacked almost nothing to it. So do the easy bits first, and progressively work through all 5. So step 1, write the copula R, which never changes. Okay, and step 2, write. Well, you can do that if whatever you want to do. Write the quantifiers in. Okay. Then you put S and P, you know that. Then you put in M, because that's going to be given to you by the figure, and then you can put in S and P there. So you can do it in a couple of different orders, but basically, the managers work through process of elimination, and you'll get them. Okay, now we're ready to extend the Venn techniques to cover syllogisms as well as the simple propositions. But first, consider the differences between the simple Venn for propositions on the left-hand side. That's the one we worked with already in chapter 4, and the complex Venn for syllogisms, which we're now beginning to work with for the first time here in chapter 5. Okay, the obvious similarity is they both have S and P at the bottom, and the difference is that the complex one adds a third circle and labels it M, sticks it on the top. By the way, you get used to doing it this way. It's just easier to be systematic about it. You'll sometimes see, you're not incorrect. Sometimes see people put the M on the bottom, whatever, but it's just less confusing one way. So let's. Okay, so they look different. The Venn for propositions has 2 circles, and the one for syllogisms has 3 circles. But they both use circles, and they both have SP. I would say the difference between these two, as I mentioned the hieroglyph before, the difference between these 2 kinds of Venn diagrams, the simple one with the 2 circles versus the complex one with the 3, is that the first one is a hieroglyph, is just a hieroglyph. But the second one is more, it's a machine. What does the Venn diagram for simple propositions do, the one we worked on already in chapter 4? It's just a translation. It just says in pictures the same thing that you can say in words, and of course that's exactly what you do. You want to make your picture, the Venn diagram, say exactly the same thing, no more no less, than what the proposition said in your diagram as a Venn. But compound Venn for syllogisms is a machine. properly used, it's going to allow you to crank out some results real quickly. Answer the question: is this syllogism valid, yay or nay? It's going to give you a decision right away. This is valid or this is invalid. So the simple Venn for statements merely translates the English statement, for example, some S or P, just as the vowel I abbreviates the same statement. And like all translations, it's redundant. Redundant is a bad thing. The simple Venn is thus redundant for some S or P as well as for I. I think of the Rosetta Stone. Here's the dark bit there is the actual surviving bit of the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum in London. The rest of it is the conjectured bits that have been lost. But basically, the Rosetta Stone was discovered in the early part of the 19th century by Champollion traveling with the French expedition in Egypt. And nobody could read hieroglyphs up to this point. But there was a mnemonic stone that had some hieroglyphs plus mnemonic Egyptian plus ancient Greek. And we could read mnemonic Egyptian, we could read ancient Greek. So we could see, what hieroglyphs corresponded to at least certain words. And then by process of extrapolation, linguists worked out, more and more and more of these hieroglyphs out of context, from context. And then, of course, people are now able to read. It's kind of hard to do. I mean, I had a friend who was doing this at NYU a couple of years ago, and I was in awe of her. Hebrew's bad enough, but trying to do hieroglyphs. But yeah, if you stay with it, you'll get it. Or the compound Venn, the one below on the left, is not just a hieroglyph. It's not merely a redundant statement. It's a tool. It lets you do something. If, for instance, the compound Venn for the whole syllogism says at least as much as the Venn for the conclusion, well, then we've passed a test. We've given a test and the test has been passed. We could say that the inference in question is valid. So we're going to do this. We're going to draw first the complex one, and then we're going to draw for comparison simple one for the conclusion and see. Do they say at least does the complex one say at least the same thing, at least as much as the simple one does, yay or nay? If the answer is yay, then the inference in question is valid. If the answer is nay, then it's invalid. But beware, this comes with a warning label. Ooh, Venn's gone bad. Yeah. It turns out that Venn shapes are used for a whole variety of different purposes, sometimes, for example, simply to classify similarities and differences. K-12 uses it for this, get groups and look at what are the common characteristics and what are the differences. That's fine. PowerPoint has a Venn generating utility that does this kind of thing. I thought when I first saw this, oh boy, so I used to use the old-fashioned overhead projector overlays, and I switched about 10 years ago or so to the PowerPoint switch for now using. Oh boy, I've got a utilities now. Actually, it turns out for our purposes that PowerPoint utility is useless. I wouldn't even have a look at it for these purposes. And also, you'll see a lot of crappy Venns on the internet and Google Venn diagrams. You get a lot of just plain direct. For our purposes, as logicians, the Venn has some very specific techniques and some very specific purposes that it doesn't necessarily have in all these other uses. So that's not to get confused at this point. Just, leave that alone. Pay attention to what I'm going to tell you here. Mr. Hurley tells you text. We are not merely classifying when we're using Venn diagrams in complex forms. We are testing syllogisms for validity. And again, PowerPoint I'll use here. Notice, in our Venn diagrams, are there any words in there? No, there aren't. We're not classifying objects. We're not saying that, whales do some things and fish do some things, and some of the things overlap, but some of the things are different. Things that can be used to kill zombies, what's their relation to things I have in my house, and things I know how to use. Okay, well, that may help you with zombies, but it's no use, absolutely no use for what we're doing here. But notice that difference. We're not using this just to classify. We're trying to do something a little different. And notice that what we do have is we first of all label our circles, whether we're doing the simple ones, the two circle, or the complex ones, the three circle. And P always, and then if you have the three circle, you label that third circle, you label M for sake of clarity. Notice the other thing. The only things we put inside of the Venn diagrams are two kinds of marks, and I'll explain the difference between these presently. Actually, I have explained it in the previous lecture. I'm going to show you how to do that, for the complex one. We use shades and we use X's. So that's the same as the simple ones, complex ones. Why does this matter that we use Venn diagrams in this? Well, remember, validity, the single most important concept in deductive logic. If any given form can be shown to be valid now, then we know we can rely on it in future instances. And if not, then we know we cannot rely on it in future instances. And the Venn gives us a quick and easy way to arrive at a verdict on validity with respect to these argument forms. For 256 of them, you can do it for each and every one in a blink of an eye. If complex Venn says at least as much as a simple Venn that would represent the conclusion, then you have a valid syllogism. You don't. That's that basic. Okay, so brass tacks. The Venn techniques for syllogisms are an extension of the techniques you already know for the single propositions. So, for example, just like for the simple propositions, be sure that you've got enough space where the circles overlap. Don't draw them the way I've done on the right-hand side, draw them the way in the middle, because you're going to need to mark potentially. And again, your only two marks are shading and Xing. You remember, what does the shade represent? It represents emptiness. Okay. Put training wheels on before for the simple ones, Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to switch to Arabic numerals. And we're not going to keep the training wheels on all the time, but just be aware, you've got 7 different property spaces now, where you only had 3 simple one. And of course, well, we're not going to be using transforms with this, so there's no worry about number 8. But the ones inside the Venn diagram itself, 7 potential properties. And you're going to want to shade or X in such a way that you draw exactly what the words say. Now, here's a very important thing. It's easy to screw this up. So I'm going to say here, and I'll show you, I'll walk you through some examples and see how that works. Very important. Only draw the premises, okay? You do not draw the conclusion directly in the 3 diagram. What you are going to do separately is draw a 2-circle diagram. Once you've finished the 2 premises, once you diagram those, then for comparison, you're going to do a 2-circle, and then you're going to do the conclusion out there separately and see if what the conclusion has to say, in fact, is said, or in fact, not said by the complex one. Okay, so your drawing is going to be limited to just your premises, not your conclusion. Okay, because once you've drawn your premises, what's going to happen is the conclusion is going to emerge, but simply as a byproduct of having drawn the premises, so you don't need to do it in a separate step. So, for example, maybe you'll start out with the MP relationship. See, there are some rules of the A premise. Okay, so you look at your M and P circle, okay, and you see that the property spaces in the M circle are 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the property spaces in the P circle are 3, 4, 7, 2, and 5 are 5, both of those circles. So, if you're going to be saying something about the way in which they overlap or don't overlap, you're going to be dealing with 3 and 4, or 6 and 7 together, or 1 and 2 together. Okay, always with 2 separate spaces. Also, if you draw the M and S relationship next, well, that would be X if you do the M and P first. Again, M is 1, 2, 3, and 4. But of course, 4 is 4. Yeah, that's fine. And the P is 2, 3, 5. In this case, 7 is out, and you don't worry about it. Only then the S and P relationship will emerge as a byproduct. You don't diagram the S and P relationship directly. Yeah, just jump back, Jack, and see what has emerged from what you've drawn. And I find it helpful. Mr. Hurley doesn't do this, but when I'm drawing these things, and if I'm not going to do them here, you can't see my hand when I draw them. But when I'm in a face-to-face class and I'm using a whiteboard, I'll literally do that. I'll put my hand over the circle that I'm not dealing with now. So if I'm going to concentrate on the M and P circle, I'm just going to end the S's in there, put my hand over it, and draw. And then when I switch to the M and S, when I start with the M and S, sometimes I start second, I do the hand, same. And you might want to do the same, particularly when you're getting started. Thus, although the complex Venn has, so it seems, three circles, you're actually not going to deal with three at a time. You're going to treat them in pairs. You're going to look at the M and P, you're going to look at the S and M, and then you're going to look at the S and P. So let's see, you do the major premise first, minor premise second. You won't always do this. Then you jump back, and you read the conclusion. That's the way it works. Now, I mentioned the Roman numerals versus the Arabic numerals. Let's just map the one onto the other here for a moment. The thing is, the areas represented by the Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3 map onto the Venn for the complex ones, but they're always 2 bits. So the one sector, the Roman numeral 1 sector, is actually Arabic numerals 2 and 5. Roman numeral 2 sector is actually Arabic numerals 3 and 6, and the P, Roman numeral 3, is 4 and 7. And sector 1, because it's only in the M circle and not in any of the others, of course, would not have appeared, so it's not part of any of the Roman numerals. So sector 1 then corresponds to 2 and 5. Sector 2 corresponds to 3 and 6. Sector 3 corresponds to 4 and 7. Roman numerals to Arabic numerals. Let's see. Somehow I should duplicate that slide. Okay, so if one wanted to say no S or P, then 2 would be shaded. Okay. You would do it with a simple diagram. To do the equivalent for the syllogism, though, you have to shade not just 3, but 3 and 6 together. Okay. Because that 3 and 6 together represent the same area as Roman numeral 2. And the only trick, and it's not really that tricky, to be sure to shade the X or the entire segment in question. So 3 and 4 together, or 6 and 7 together, not just 4 by itself, not just 7. Let's say 6, 7 by itself. That's all. And well, you won't do this directly. If your syllogism ends up shading both the 3 and 6 sectors, this is the equivalent of having shaded directly the 2 simple S and P properties. If in the end the result is the same, it's the same. And we're going to see an example or two of this that we're going to actually shade sector 3 in one operation, and we're going to shade sector 6 in another operation. But together, the result is both 3 and 6 are shaded. So therefore, the entire Roman numeral 2 area, therefore shaded. And that bears on a decision whether we have valid inference or not. Okay, another rule of thumb here. Excuse me. Universals first. At least whenever you have a choice, sometimes you don't. But if you have a universal proposition and a premise and a particular premise, then you go with the universal first. If there's 2 universals, doesn't matter. 2 particulars doesn't matter. So again, I said, a while ago I said we'll shade the M and P first. We don't always shade the M and P first. It depends on its quality. Its quantity. Okay, and there's a reason why we have this rule, because if you do this, it might, not always, but it might save you some trouble thereafter if you come to a particular. If you start with a particular first, for example, we start with some MRS from the IO3 syllogism. Okay. You notice that the X there overlaps the boundary. Okay, I'm going to come to this, back to this in just a minute. You do that if you have to. Whenever you're not sure, let's see, in this case, you're not sure if all you know is that some M are S, well, you don't know of the overlap between M and S, which of those two Arabic sectors, 2 or 3, that it goes into. So you put the X, make it dangle the fence, as it were, dangle on the boundary to express that level of uncertainty. And of course, that is a cost. You're better to get certainty if you can, if honestly come by it, but if you can't, you indicate that you don't have it, and that's what that dangling X would indicate. However, if you had first diagrammed the universal, so what happens there? No M or P. Okay, you've used the shade to exclude that lozenge there where M and P overlap. And then when you come put your X in, you no longer have to dangle it, because you already know something now that you didn't know if you started with the particular first. What you already know is that sector 3 is empty. So if there's something which is both in the S and the M circle, some M or S, then you know it's not going to go into 3 because there's nothing in 3. It has to go into, it can only go into 2. So therefore you're entitled to put it there. You don't have to make a dangle, and therefore you indicate that you know more stuff. So that's That's a gain rather than that's the reason for the rule. It won't always work out that way, but sometimes it will, and when it does, it's an advantage. Indeed, a dangling x does not say the same as, indeed it says less than an x that you can squarely put in another segment. And by the way, not all dangles are possible. Mr. Hurley's got a good illustration here. You don't want to put an x dangling on the outside boundary. It's going to be somewhere in the overlap, but not only on certain spaces, not on others. So pay attention to what you're trying to say there. Okay. Well, now we've gone through the techniques. We have the techniques from chapter 4. We've tweaked them a little bit for the complex ones here at chapter 5. Now we have them under our belts, right? I hope. So now we're ready to use these events as machines to sort out valid from the inferences. Here's how the test works. Go back to that previous example, EIO1, which would say what? No M or P, some S or M, therefore some S are not P, okay? First thing you do is draw the three-circle Venn for the syllogism, and then shade the M and P universals first, not a choice in this case, for that E proposition, okay? There's the shade in that lozenge. It represents the intersection of the M and P circles. The shade, of course, tells us that's empty. It tells us no M or P, or no P or M also. Okay, next thing we do, diagram the minor proposition, sorry, the minor premise. And of course, this is a particular one, so we're going to use an X instead of a shade and put the X where it belongs, as we just did a minute ago. But again, stop there. Don't mark the conclusion. You got nothing more to mark at this point. Now you have a complete Venn diagram for that syllogism EIO1. Okay. Last thing you want to do is draw a separate Venn diagram. This time there's two circles, and ask yourself, okay, what does that conclusion statement have to say? Go back to our conclusion. It says some S are not P. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to put an X in the S circle because it is an S, but not in the overlap between S and P, because this particular S, and that's what some means, there's at least one. This one is not also a P. It's only an S. That's the only place. Okay. Now ask yourself the question: does the syllogism then say at least as much as the conclusion then? Does the inference is valid? If not, it's invalid. Of course, it may say more. That's okay. But does it say at least as much? Well, in this case, it does say at least as much. There is in the complex, then there is an X, well, which is an S, but not a P. And in the conclusion, there is an S, which is the X, but not a P. And by the way, the top diagram also tells you that that X, which is not a P, is also an M. So you've got some more information there, but it's more information than you need for the validity decision. You can't tell from the simple diagram that there are any M's at all, much less that X might also be one of them. From the complex way, you can tell that in addition, but again, too much information, if you will, at that point. But you see, the test itself is very simple. All you do is you draw two pictures, you compare them, you eyeball them, you say yay or nay, and then you say valid or invalid. Boom, that's it. The Venn diagram machine to test validity is such a simple test because it is formal. Remember the difference between formal and informal fallacies? Formal fallacies are the ones that you can eyeball. Modus tollens, recognize it as one of the valid conditionals, etc. And and when we jumped ahead to the informal fallacies, we lost that ability. We could no longer just eyeball them. It's a matter of law rather than system. Now, with the Venn diagrams here as we're using them, also you can eyeball the form, the Venn pictures. If they match in a defined way, then the inference is valid. If they fail to match in the same defined way, then the inference is valid. In this case, the complex Venn for this is the Barber syllogism AAA1 does in fact match what the simple Venn to the conclusion all S or P should say, so it's a valid inference. This is how the machine works to sort out valid from invalid categorical syllogisms. To repeat, vector 1 corresponds, Roman numeral 1 corresponds to Arabics 2 and 5, Roman 2 to Arabics 3 and 6, Roman 3 to Arabics 4 and 7. Okay, so if I wanted to say no S or P, then all of 2 would have to be shaded. That is Arabic 3 and 6, both, not either or. Both of them, same thing, to say the same thing as shading Roman 2. Again, although the complex Venn has, so it seems, three circles, you're going to treat them in pairs. You're going to look at M and P, you're going to look at S and M, and then finally you're going to look at S and P. If you think about it, you'll see that the syllogism Venn with its three circles is really not that different from the proposition Venn. It's just three groups of proposition Venns imploded on one another, as it were. Okay, you have the M and P two circles, you have the M and S two circles, and then you have the S and P two circles, and then put them together, implode them, and you get something in addition you have with any of them angularly. After all, each statement in the syllogism, premise or conclusion, is a single proposition, and these can all be represented by two circles. So that's really, if you learn to look at it that way, it'll make more sense. It only looks like there are three circles, but they're really three groups. They're just superimposed. So by drawing each of the premise propositions, the M and the S, the M and the P, and a picture of the conclusion is produced automatically, then the only question is, does the inference emergent in the conclusion actually match what the S and P proposition ought to say, yay or nay? Okay, so that's just kind of a review of what we've done. Diagram the premises, simply read the conclusion. Diagram the premises, jump back, check, don't diagram the conclusion. Okay, now let's see how this works by examining the syllogism IOE1. Okay, IOE mood, 1 is the figure, and here we can diagram it. You see the quantifiers are appropriate there. See the S and P's are in the right places. The M's are in the right places because they are figure 1. That's where figure 1 will put the M's. Okay, we're good there. Okay, so first we're going to do the S and M. The rule says universals first, but since they're both universal, it doesn't matter. So S and M first. Sarah and Mule, huh? Some M are not P. Okay, there's at least one thing which is an M. There's at least one thing which is an S, which is not an M. That is in the S circle but outside the M circle. Now, because you don't have any shades at this point to give you any guidance, this is one of those cases where we're going to have to let that X dangle. And I just put in the missing part of the edge of the missing circle there just to see that. At this point, you can't just put the X in the S circle anywhere. You don't know whether it goes in the one sector, which overlaps with the P, or it goes in the part of the S that doesn't overlap with the P, which you know is it doesn't overlap with M, but that's all you know. Okay, then we go to the MP relationship. And here again, we have particular, so we don't have a shade there in advance to tell us rule out some stuff. So we have to make this one dangle too. There's at least one M, and it is a P. Okay, so it goes somewhere in that intersection between the M and the P circles, but which side of that border we really don't know, what side of the fence. So we have to sit it on the fence, we have to make it dangle. Next what we do is implode the pairs together and see what results. What results is we have two X's, and they're both dangling, although in different spots. And then we draw the Venn for the conclusion, and we ask, does the complex one say at least the same? And not only does not say at least the same, it doesn't say anywhere near the same. Because look what happens here. We have a universal conclusion, which we tried to derive from two particular premises. Okay, if you don't start out by putting a shade somewhere in that complex diagram, then how in the devil are you ever going to get a shade anywhere in the result? You are not. So, but we'll come to this in a minute toward the end of today's lecture. There's another rule which governs this. You cannot get a universal conclusion if both premises are. Well, that kind of makes sense. So, you can do the Venn diagram and prove it. It's very easy to do. But if you have that rule in mind, you can just eyeball that and say, okay, I got two. Let's see. Oops, here. Yeah. Just making a bit of a. All we have to do basically is to eyeball the diagram to see if it works. And of course, we know that we don't even have to go even that far if we have two particular premises, because we're not going to get a universal conclusion. If we put in two X's for the two particular premises, we're never going to get a shade for the universal. It's not going to happen. So, all right. So let's try some examples here. And I'm going to do these for you now. What I do in face-to-face class at this point is I have a whiteboard and I ask students to come up on a voluntary basis. Of course, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. But this is good practice because, you know, you don't know that you can do these things until you can do these things. And you could always tell that this, of course, is an exercise that will come up on the final exam. Always tell who has worked it out in, you know, at their leisure in studying, and is not just writing this the diagrams for the first time on the exam. It shows, like syllogism. You know, if you haven't played with the syllogism, you haven't worked out your mistakes, you know, or you can correct them. You're now making your mistakes in the exam. That's never a good thing. So, what I would suggest for those of you who are watching this on video rather than being in a live session, you can pause, you know, wherever you need to, and you work out the problem, and then you look at my solution and see, you know, how it matches. Okay, so we're going to start with EAE2. That is, what have I just given you? I've given you figure and mood. Figure is 2. That tells me where the M term is going to be. And the mood is EAE. So combine EAE2. Now, I'm going to have, it's a little awkward here. Okay. I'm trying to bring up my drawing. Oops, that's not what I want. There we go. Okay. And so basically, let's fill in using the figure in the mood. Let's fill in the syllogism. You know, we've got 4 bits to each categorical proposition, and there's a subject term, predicate term, copula, and then there's quantifier, and we're all in standard forms. Have that, but you know, I'm sort of lazy, so let me go ahead and I always do the easy bits first. So I'm going to put the word R-A-R-E here because we know the copula is always going to be the same no matter what proposition we're dealing with. Always the third person plural verb to be. Okay, and another easy bit, we always know that the subject term of the conclusion is going to go here, and the predicate term of the conclusion is going to go here. And of course, the predicate term of the conclusion is also called the major term, which is to say it's going to appear in the major premise. And the subject term of the conclusion is the minor term, also going to appear in the minor premise. We just don't know where yet because we haven't filled in middle terms. But before doing that, let's do an easy bit. The quantifiers. Okay, what's the quantifier for the E proposition? Well, that's the universal negative, so we know that the quantifier is no. And for the A, that's the universal affirmative, so we're going to know we know that's going to be all. And then likewise again, then here, no, for another E. Okay. Then figure 2 tells us where we're going to put our middle term. And what does figure 2 say? It says you put the middle term here and here. Okay, now we can fill in the M's and the P's. So the P, which is the major term, goes there, and the let's see, right? Oops, let's do that over here. The S minor term goes in the minor premise. Okay. Now we've got our syllogism together. All no M, no P or M, all S or M, no S or P. Next thing we want to do is to draw our Venn diagram, and I can do this. The tools here in Zoom are somewhat cumbersome, but let's see if I can make my circles overlap appropriately. You know, I want that one to be a little, just a little farther. Oops. Nope. There we go. And then I'm going to draw again. Oops. My third circle here. Okay, that overlaps pretty good. Make it a circle. And then I'm going to want to label them. So this one is S, and this one is P, and this one is M. Okay, oops, easy for me to say. And now I'm ready to draw. So remember the basic rule is universals first, but these are both universal, doesn't matter. Okay, let's just take the first one first. Now, what does it say? It says no P or M. That is to say, anything which is a P is not also M. So the bits of the P circle, which, oops, represent basically the lozenge between the two, where the two of them overlap, the M and the P, that's going to be empty. And how do we indicate emptiness? We do it by shading. I shade that lozenge. Remember, both bits here, not just one. And what I've shown is that the overlap between M and P is empty. That is to say, nothing which is in the P circle is also in the M circle. Anything that's in the P circle outside the M circle. Now, I'm going to switch off just a moment to the color orange. I probably shouldn't do this. I went to Florida State, and my brother and sister went to University of Florida, and blue and orange are their colors. I will live to regret this, but I'm doing it. All S are M. So what I want to say is, if anything is in the S circle, also in the M circle, meaning anything in the S circle outside of the M circle is empty. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to do that by shading these bits. Show that. And remember, I want to do both bits, not just one. I got to shade this bit here as well as the other. Okay, and what I've done now is I've shown that all S are M, nothing in the S circle is not also in the M circle. Okay. Next thing I want to do, let's see, go to my tool, blue, is I want to draw my simple, simple Venn. Okay, simple Venn diagram for the conclusion. So I want two circles for that one. And here we go. I want to label these also. So S. Okay, so what am I going to do to show that no S are P? Well, this time, let's see. I'm going to take my line here. I'm just going to do this one in green for contrast. Nothing in the S circle is also in the P circle. That is to say, the lozenge between the two circles where they overlap, that's going to be shaded to show that it is. That's what I'm going to show right here with the green. Okay, good. All right, now, jump back, Jack. What do you need to do? You need to compare these two. Does the Venn for the complex Venn for the syllogism itself say at least as much as the simple one for the conclusion? The answer to that is yes. Okay, so the lozenge here is shaded in green, and the lozenge here is shaded in a combination of blue and orange. Now, don't worry about the fact that in order to get that result, we had to do two steps in the complex diagram. We only had to do one step in the simple one. As long as the result is the same, as long as the complex one says at least as much as the simple one, and it does. It says that no S are P. That's fine. Now, it also says some other things. It says some things about M. But since M is not included in the conclusion, you don't have to worry about that. The fact that it says more, it says at least about S and P. So that's what we need to show. Okay, and let's see here. I need to clear, right. Clear all drawings. Okay, good. Now, let's see if I can move on. Nope, I have to close this. Okay, so now we move on, and okay, let's see. Zoom is quirky. Move to the presenter view. Okay, good. So that's just what we've done there, summarized. No P or M, all S are M. So you see the M is lined up in the number 2 slot, and no S or P. Okay, a little neater picture. And of course, what do we conclude from the fact that the complex one says at least as much as the simple one? We conclude that this inference represented by EA2 is a valid one. Okay, let's move on to another. Remember to change the presenter view. Okay. AEE1, figure 1, mood AEE. So once again, let's pull up the toolbar. I think this one, yeah, this one should be able to do. Let's see. Oh, nope. Okay, here we go. Right, so, okay, so this time, again, I'm lazy. I want to do the easy bits first. So I'm going to put in the copula here, R, and the copula here, also R, and likewise down here, all 3 propositions have copula. And then, of course, easy bit, the S here, oops, this is here, and the P is here. Okay. Now, our quantifiers, A, E, E. Well, quantifier for A is all, and for E is no, and also for E, no, once again. Okay, now, where do we put our middle term? Well, figure says 1, so we know the 1 works like this and like this. Oh, cool. And now we know our P term is going to go here along the left 4, and the S term is going here also by process of elimination. Okay, and we're ready to go. We have the syllogism that says all M are P and no S or M, and so all, sorry, no S or P. Okay, so we're going to do our circles. Let's see. All right, circles here. Oh, no, have to change that. Let's see. Okay. Circles here. Chalk is so much here. Or whiteboard, so much here. Well, chalk is too. Yes, I remember chalk. Let's just move that. There we go. Okay. And oops. Trying to draw with a touchpad. Nope. Hello. Squeaky clean. Good. Okay. So we're going to want to label. So our S goes here, and our P, of course, here, and M at the top. Okay. Now, again, our rule says universals first, but here again, we don't have to choose because they're both universal. So let's take, oops, here, this, and I want to say all M are P. This is a major premise. So look at the M and P circle. Anything which is an M is also a P. So there's nothing in the M circle that's not in the P circle, and therefore we're going to indicate that emptiness there with shades. Lines to make a shade. And again, I'm doing both bits of the M circle which is outside of the P circle. So that whole area is empty. Okay. Now, minor premises, no S R M. Okay. And so nothing which is the S circle is also in the M circle. That is to say we have okay, right here, the lozenge between the two, another shade. And notice we're shading the same area again. That's okay, because that's what our premise tells us to do. Okay. Now we want to draw the simple Venn for the conclusion proposition. Okay. And there, good. Okay. And we're going to label these again S, P. So, okay. And now, how do we make that diagram say no S or P? We do so by shading, and we shade that lozenge between the two where S and P overlap, because if no S or P, then there's nothing which is both an S and a P area. All the S's are not P's, and all the P's are not S's. Think about the transforms. Okay, now go back, Jack, look at that and say, does the Venn for the complex Venn for the sorry, say at least as much as the simple Venn for the proposition, the conclusion? And the answer is no, it does not in this case, because see here, this whole lozenge needs to be shaded in the two circle diagram, whereas that whole lozenge is not shaded in the 3. So there might very well be some things which are S and also P, given what the syllogism says, where the conclusion rules that out. So what do we conclude? Let's see here. conclude that this is invalid. And indeed, let's see. That's what we find here. Okay, so that's just we see the figure 1, how those M's line up in that offset. Okay, and let's see. We're going to do again another one, IAI4. Okay, so I think I've worked out how to do this now. Good. Okay. So we're going to draw our circles. Oops. Oh no, sorry. Well, the syllogism first. Okay, once again, easy bits. The copula are. See, there's a method to this, isn't there? It's really quite straightforward if you think about it, just step by step by step. They look complicated, but they're really not as complicated. Okay, and we know, of course, S is going to go here, and P is going to go here. Alrighty, and our quantifiers. Well, let's see. What's the quantifier for the I proposition? Let's do this. It is some, right? The particular derivative. And what is it for A? We know it's all again, right? Works with affirmative. And then here, once again, the particular affirmative. Okay. Oh, I forgot. Okay, good. So where does our middle term go? We'll look at its figure 4. Figure 4 is an outside bit of the shirt collar, if you will. It slants back the opposite way from figure 1. And there we have it. And then we know to put our P up here, only place it can go. And put our S here likewise, only place it can go. Elimination. Now we're ready to draw our Venn diagram. So let's go. Circle, circle, and circle. Do that one a little bit. Okay, good. Good overlap. And now we label S, P, and M. All right, so we draw. Now, universals first. Well, there is one universal in one particular premise. But we're going to take the universal first. That's the M and the S. And what we're going to do is we're going to show that all M are S. So anything that's in the M circle is also in the S circle. Therefore, those bits of the M circle which are not S are empty. And that's what we're going to show with this shade. Okay, so any bit of the M circle outside of the S, and that's going to be these bits here. Just draw another. There. Okay. Now, our particular proposition says some P are M. So there's at least one P, and it is an M. So something which is a P and also an M has to go in, let's see, do we have the one thing? Has to go here. We'll mark an X there to show that. You know what? Let me just because that's kind of a small space. Let me just change the color of that so it'd be easier to distinguish. Not one of our shades. It goes in that space there. Okay. Now we're going to draw once again. Oops. Our Venn diagram for the conclusion. So it's a circle, and it's another circle. And there we go. Label those. Oops. And P. Now remember, we didn't draw the conclusion in the 3-circle diagram. We're going to draw that separately here. And we want to be able to say some S are P. That is, there is at least one thing which is an S. also a P, so that would have to be, of course, we do that by an X because it's a particular thing. So one thing, that one goes in here in the overlap between the S and the P. It's something which is in the S circle, also in the P circle. There's one of them, at least one of them. So there's at least one thing, which is an S, which is also a P, and that's what that shows. Now, jump back, Jack. What do we see? That's the conclusion for the syllogism itself on the whole. Say at least as much as the syllogism for the individual conclusion, and the answer is yes. Both of them show there's at least one S, and it is a P. By the way, again, the complex one shows a little more. It shows that that thing which is both an S and a P is also an M. It doesn't have to be, but it just is. However, that's too much information. You don't need that. No, all we need to know is that there is at least one S and it is a P. Our diagram, complex diagram, shows that, which is what the conclusion needs to show. So we conclude that this too is a valid inference. So we'll close that and move along, and that's what we have. Just what we did before. And again, see figure 4. It's that slant, the other opposite slant of the shirt collar from number 1. Okay, let's go to another one. This one is A002. Okay, so let's do our text, and we'll put in the copula first, of course. A-R-E. A-R-E. Oops. And one more time. A-R-E. And of course, the S goes here. And the P goes here. Okay. What are our quantifiers? Well, A would be all. And O, now remember, this is the particular, but the particular negative. So we want to say not only some, but we want to say not. Put that here. And we want to say also, for the O proposition, we want to say some and also not. So here we go. Let's see. Oops. Put that there. Yeah, a little better. And not P. P. Oops. Make that a little clearer. Oops. No, put that there. Okay. All right. Okay, so where does our middle term go? Our middle term, once again, M, and it's in the number 2 slot. So number 2 goes here, also here. And then, of course, our P would go here, and our S would go here. Okay, so let's see what we got. We have all P are M. Some S are not M, some S are not P. Okay, now we're ready to draw our Venn diagram. So circle, circle, and circle. Okay, label S and P and M. Okay. Once again, universals first. So all P are M. There's our universal. That is, if anything is a P, it is also an M. So there's nothing in the P circle which is not in the M circle. And therefore, that bit of the P circle, which is not M, gets shaded to indicate. So remember both bits, not just one. Okay, those bits of the P that are not M are empty because all P are M. Okay. Now, our second minor proposition, minor premise. Some S are not M. There is at least one thing which is an S, and it is not an M. Okay, well, that could be in either of these two places here, but since this one is shaded, we're going, oops, let's see, we don't put the letter X here. We're going to put the letter X here. Okay, now we want to draw. I'm laughing because the Zoom utilities are a little awkward. So I'm laughing at myself, sorry. Oops. A little bit better alignment. Okay, so we're going to label these also. This one is S, of course. Okay, and we're going to draw our conclusion, because remember, we don't draw the conclusion in the complex one, but we draw the conclusion separately. How do I say there's at least one thing which is an S and not a P? Well, I do so by, again, so I'm going to want to do X. And so I'm going to put my X over here in the S circle in such a way that it's not also in the P circle. Okay. The bit where S and P overlap, that's not where that X is. There might be things in it, we don't know this, but all our proposition licenses us to say is that there's at least one S and it is not a P. There it is. Okay, jump back, check. Does the complex one say at least as much as the simple one? Yes, it does. X in the S, but not in the P. And of course, part of the P in the complex one is also shaded to indicate it's empty. That's where the X cannot go. And that's of course what allows us to put that X into that one space. Otherwise, we have to make a dangle on the border. That's uncertainty, but we've eliminated some of that uncertainty by diagramming our universal first. The ability to shade that bit first tells us that putting an X in there is not an option because there's nothing in there. The only place we can put our X is over clearly, and it shows more information on that one. So what do we conclude here? This one too is valid because why? Because the Venn for the complex Venn says at least as much as the simple one for the conclusion. So let me clear the drawings and that's basically a summary of what we just did. See, again, the M's are lined up in the number 2 figure, okay? So all P are M, and some S are not M, some S are not P. That is a valid inference. Okay, and now we move along to yet another. And okay, so this one says IAI 1. Mood IAI figure 1. Oh, well, lazy me. Let's just do the easy bits again. Why not? If they're easy, take advantage of it. If you're having fun in life, notice this. Okay. And we'll put our S there, of course, that's where it goes. And our P always goes there. And now what about our quantifiers? Well, the quantifier for I is simply sum. Let's put that back here a bit. And the quantifier for A is all. And likewise for I, once again, it's sum. Okay, where does our middle term go? Because it's figure 1, we're going to put the middle term here. Oops, not again. In the major premise, here in the minor premise, and then we're going to put our major term up here in the major premise, our minor term in the minor premise. Okay, there we go. So, some M are P, all S are M, some S are P. And again, let's see how they line up. Okay, and now our circle. Okay, diagrams here and here. Oops. Let's see. Okay, and here, number 3. label them S, P, and M. Okay, and we draw them. So let's see. Once again, we have one universal, one particular. So we'll do the universal first. We're going to want to shade. So let's see. I want to say all S are M. So if anything is in the S circle, it's also in the M circle. Therefore, that bit of the S circle, which is not in the M circle, outside the M circle, well, that one is empty. So we shade to show exactly that. Once again, we want to shade one bit, but both bits. Okay. Now, some M are P. Okay. There's at least one thing which is an M, and it is also a P. Well, let's see. The overlap between M and P has 2 bits because we've drawn it with 3 bits. So that allows it between M and P, but there's a borderline there, and we don't know from our premise, that we know that some M are P. We don't know which of those 2 bits it goes in. So therefore, to indicate that lack of certainty, we have to draw our X in such a way that it dangles on the fence, dangles over that border. See? Okay, and what do we need to show for the conclusion? Well, let's draw our Venns first. Okay, and so, oops. There, okay, that's better. And we'll label S and P. Okay, and how do we draw it? We want to make sure there's at least one thing which is an S, and it's also a P. Okay, well, we would do that. Oops, let's see. Do that by making an X in that area where S and P overlap. So there's at least one thing, that's the X, that one thing, and it is both an S and a P. Well, it's in the S circle, it's in the P circle. Now, does the complex diagram say at least as much as the simple one? The answer there is no. And the reason it's no is because, remember, we had to make that X dangle on the border. So what that tells us is, well, yeah, that X might be in the overlap between the S and P circles, but it might also not be. It might be in the overlap just between the M and P, which is outside the S, in which case that X would be a P, but not an S. And what our conclusion requires us to say is that, yes, there is some P, not S. So here's an example. Remember the last example, we eliminated a possibility by putting a shade in first. This time our shade doesn't do that for us. So when we come to put the X in, we have to express some uncertainty. The universal proposition doesn't allow us to get a little more certainty than we did before. So we have to simply draw what's there. And so does that complex then say at least as much as simple? No, it doesn't. So what do we conclude? Well, we conclude that this syllogism IAI2 is invalid. The inference drawn there is not a valid one. And that's a summary. And again, note the figure 1, those M's line up the way they should. Okay. Let's do A001. So once again, the mood is A00, the figure is 1. I'll get my drawing tools out. And of course, first we want our copula. Surprise, surprise. Okay, and our S is always the same, so that's an bit. And our P is always the same in the conclusion, of course. Okay, and now our quantifiers, A, O, and O. Well, A would be all. Oops. And O, again, some, but some not. Okay, and then likewise here we have some. I heard Jane Goodall pant hooting on YouTube the other night. let's see, we want to say not here. Okay, some S are not P. Okay, so where does our middle term go? Well, the one figure one says it goes here and also here. And then of course P has to go here. Place the S can go. See how easy this is. Okay, so and let's work through systematically. Process of elimination, do it step by step by step. Involves your uncle. Okay, so let's do our diagram, Venn diagram for the syllogism. 3 circles first. Okay. There we go. And third circle here. Yeah. There. And we'll label them S, P, and M. Now we're ready to draw. So this time again, we have a universal and a particular, so we do the universal first. All M are P. Anything which is in the M circle is also in the P circle, so therefore those bits of the M outside the P circle will be shaded. They're empty. Nothing, no bits of the M circle which are outside the P circle contain any elements whatsoever. So all M have to be also in the P circle. Some S are not M, so there's at least one thing which is an S and it's not an M. Okay. But that would be these bits here. So in order to indicate that that's where that S is, that's one particular thing is we have to, once again, draw our X in such a way that it dangles on a border, expressing the uncertainty as to which of those 2 bits it's in. And one or the other, not both, that one is not in. But there might be, who knows, other S's somewhere, anywhere. But we know there's, all our syllogism tells us, all the information it gives us is there's at least one S, and that S is not an M. Now, what does that tell us vis-a-vis the conclusion? We'll draw a Venn diagram there accordingly. And, oops. Okay. Pull that way. Okay. And then we'll say S and P here. Okay. What does our conclusion say? It says there's at least one thing which is an S and it's not a P. So we're going to want to draw an X in the S circle, but not in the P circle. That's where that has to go. Right there. Now, John. So, therefore, what do we conclude? The inference that we draw from this syllogism A001, the inference we draw is an invalid inference. It's not going to work, not going to be reliable, and always give us a true conclusion with a couple of premises in there again. Is just what we've done here. Again, notice where figure 1 is. See how the diagrams work. Okay, now we're going to go to a familiar syllogism. We've seen this puppy before. One is one. What do we know that one has a name? What do we know that name is? That name, of course, is Barbara. Okay, so first of all, let's do the copula. A-R-E. A-R-E. And A-R-E. And the S goes here. Easy for me to say. And E goes here. Okay, what are our quantifiers? Well, they're the same in every case. They are all. Yeah. And all and all. Okay, there we go. All right, and now where does our middle term line up? Well, M here and M here for figure 1. And then, of course, P and okay, ready for Venns. Okay. And let's just make that. There we go. Okay, so, and we label S, P, M. Okay, and in the barber, of course, both premises are universal, so we don't need to choose. Let's just go ahead and first one first. All M are P. That is to say, if anything is an M, it's also a P. So therefore, those bits of the M outside of P are empty and therefore are shaded. Once again, it's both bits of the M which are outside of P. Two things to mark, we mark both. Okay, then all S are M. That is to say, if anything is an S, it's also an M. That is to say, anything in the S circle, which is outside the M circle, empty and therefore shaded. So we'll do that this way. Again, remember 2 bits. And okay, good. Now we go to our then for the conclusion. Simple 2 circle. And so we label S and P. Okay. And what does that conclusion have to show? It has to show that everything which is an S is also a P, therefore those bits of the S are empty, and we show that this way. Now, does the complex diagram show at least as much as the simple one does? The answer to that is yes. Even though, once again, I didn't do the 2 colors this time, but it's a little easier to see. We did this in 2 stages, okay? And so we left open the possibility that there is something in that intersection that lies among all 3 of the circles, S, M, and P, okay? But therefore, if anything is an S, it's also a P. And by the way, what that says, in addition, it says more than the conclusion says. It says, if anything is an S, it's also an M. So you could, go ahead and use that same diagram for a separate syllogism. You would draw it the same way. But basically, it does the job here because what it says is there is some space in which something could be both an S and a P. And that's what the conclusion requires us to say. So therefore, this of course is the Barber inference. So we already know on other grounds that this one is valid. This is indeed. And let me just go ahead and move on to, there we go. And basically that just sums up our work. Once again, notice the figure, how it works out. There's the color. Now, suppose instead of AAA1, figure 1, we took the same mood, but we used figure 2. Okay, that's going to give us a different result. How that works. And easy bits. Copula, and copula. And S term. Oops. Go. And P term. Okay. Quantifiers. Once again, same ones we did in the last example too. Because that was AA1, this is AA2. So going to be some similarity, but a key difference. Okay, because this time, instead of putting our M term in figure 1, we're going to put it in figure 2, which is different. And here, then of course our P term goes here, and our M term goes here. Okay, so all PRM, all SRM, and all SRP. Okay, let's do our Venn diagram. Oops. So, circle, circle, oops. And circle. Then label it S, P, and M. Okay, and here we don't have a choice because our two primitives are both universal. So let's just take the first one. We want to say all PRM, that is, if anything is in the P circle, also in the M circle. So that bit of the P circle, which is not an M, gets shaded to indicate that fact, to indicate the emptiness of the P bit outside of the M bit. That's sort of the overlap between them. Okay, and that's what that shows. Now, our minor premise, all SRM, is if anything is an S, it's also an M. Therefore, those bits of S outside the M circle, they too are going to have to be empty. And of this. Now notice we're going to end up marking one little bit 2 times, the same little bit. There we go. So that one is shown to be empty by 2 separate premises. That's okay. The syllogism is. Now we want to do our, oops, we're going to do our Venn for the conclusion. And here that is. Okay, it's just a, oops. Okay, and then label appropriately. Now jump back. Let's have to draw. What does the conclusion have to say? All S or P, that is, it has to say if anything is an S, it's also a P. Okay, so we do that by once again shading, and we shade that bit of the S, which is outside of the P, to show that it's empty. Therefore, if anything is an S, if it's in the S circle, the bit of the S circle it's in is also that bit which overlaps with P, not in the bit which doesn't. There we jump back and we say, does the complex one say at least as much as the simple? And the answer is no, it doesn't. But you see, there's 2 bits of the S circle in the complex one that are not shaded, not empty. So maybe there's something in that overlap between S and M that doesn't also overlap with P. So if that's where anything is, then there are some S's which, potentially some S's which don't, in fact, fit also in the P circle. Maybe there's some that are too, but there are potentially some that aren't. So does the complex Venn say at least as much as the conclusion requires it to say? No, it doesn't. So once again, we have an example of an invalid inference. Clear. And so, and this is what we got again. See how the difference is here. In the AA2, the M's line up in slot 2, whereas in the previous one, they lined up in slot 1. That makes all the difference in the world. See, that those diagrams match in AAA1, Barbara, but those diagrams do not correspond in the appropriate way in the AAA2. Okay, what a difference a figure makes. They share the identical mood, AAA, but one is valid and the other is invalid. Okay, let's move on to another. Let's see here. Good. And easy bits first, once again. Say that right? I'm so predictable. That's good because this is actually so predictable. If you get it down, it becomes really easy. You can do it in your sleep, almost. Please, I may define a nightmare, but it should come to you trippingly off the tongue. It should come to you simply and clearly and distinctly, as I would have wished. Okay, now quantifiers. O would be some, but remember, this is not just a particular negative, so we need and not. And the I quantifier is just some, but it's the affirmative. And then we have, once again, the negative, some. Get the word not. Okay, good. All right, and our figure is 1, so the M letter goes up here and here, figure 1. Barbara. Okay, and then of course our P here and here. So OIO1, some M are not P, some S are M, and some S are not P. Okay, and what does our Venn say? Well, let's get it up. And and third circle. Okay, oops. There we go. S, P, and M. Okay. All right, this time we don't have a choice because we don't have a universal. So if I want to say some M are not P, let's see, line here. Okay, there's at least one thing which is an M and it is not a P. So it's going to be somewhere in here, but the thing is we don't know in which segment it is, so we're going to have to express that uncertainty by making our X dangle on a border. Okay, then some S are M. There's at least one thing which is an S and it's also an M, but again, we don't know which bit that is, so we're going to make X dangle on its other border here. So that says it could be in either of those 2 bits, and just like the first X, that it could be in either of 2 bits. Okay. So what does our conclusion require us to say? Okay, draw that separately, to circle that, and okay, and label and P. And this one has to say there is one thing which is an S, and use an X to indicate that particular again. One thing which is S, which is not a P, so it has to go into that bit of the S circle, which does not overlap with the P circle. That's where it has to go. Now, does the complex diagram say at least as much simple one? Well, no, it doesn't, because the thing which is an S and a P, well, okay, first of all, the first X is an S, but it's clearly not a P either way you cut it. But the second one we drew says that there is something that is an S, but it could be a P it might not be a P. We're not certain enough to say, we can't say. Therefore, of course, what do we conclude? Conclude that the complex Venn does not say at least as much as the simple Venn. Therefore, invalid rather than valid. And again, let's just go ahead. Oops. And look at the result. Run a little more pretty way. Again, it shows it's invalid. We have the figure 1 and so forth. Okay, so we've worked through a number of examples here, and these are examples right out of Mr. Hurley's text, but you can work through there, or you can work them through here, by pausing and so forth. Or you can take down the names that you spoke by yourself and back any way you want to do it. But again, you're not going to know how to do these things until you do these things. You're not going to be able to show on an exam that you're competent to use Venn diagrams. First of all, to draw Venn diagrams, and then to know, what you're going to do with them, unless you have worked them out in advance of sitting down. I might very well give you the OI01, for example, the figure in the mood, and say, give me the syllogisms like I just did for you. Or I might just give you the syllogism and say, tell me what the figure in mood is, and then go ahead and draw the Venn diagram and tell me, based on the Venn diagram, whether the inference is valid or not. All those things you should be able to do. So again, forewarned is forearmed. Now we talked about the converse, remember back in chapter 4. And if we think about the converse again, this sheds a little light on figure mood and validity. Remember, E and I are logically equivalent with their converse, while A and O are not logically equivalent. This fact helps explain why some combinations of figure and mood are valid, while others are not valid. Notice for the AAA mood, only 1 out of 4, the Barber syllogism is valid. We work through the AA2 if you want to work through A3 and AA4. Like I've done here, you can do that. Notice for the EIO mood, all 4 figures are valid. Why is this? Well, because E and its converse, E, which is no M or P, and its converse, no P or M, are logically equivalent. Therefore, they produce diagrams. I and its converse are also logically equivalent. I is some S or M, its converse is some M or S. So they too produce identical diagrams because of the converse. Following the rule universals first, and since the universal is the negative, this pushes the M, which is also an S outside the P circle, therefore that S must be a non-P. And notice, not only is the EIO mood valid over all 4 figures, because of the converses, the 4 Venn diagrams are also identical. But this is not always the case for every mood. And if we go back to the triple A's, the A's have no logical equivalence with their converse. That's why you don't get the kind of result you get. Oh. Once again, that was a little bit advanced. If you didn't quite follow all the 3, you can take some time to work it, but it's not a major point. If you understand the Venn diagrams and how to use them, that's the major. And for those that want to do a little more advanced. Once again, complex Venn as a machine is highly specific. Okay, don't do the crappy diagrams that you see where you're just filling in property names and so on and so forth. When you're using that Venn, the complex Venn, you are grinding out a result. You are asking yourself, yay or nay, is this valid? And if the complex Venn says at least as much as its conclusion Venn says, then the answer is yes, it's valid, and if the answer is no, then it's invalid. A machine is something which does work. It produces a product. In logic, we use Venn diagrams, not merely to classify, but we use them specifically to test syllogisms for validity. As I hope you've seen now, this machine is really quite simple to use once you get the hang of it. Once you make the base of the effort to master a few basic concepts and distinctions, and of course also once you memorize the vowel letters and you've memorized the figure and mood, and that again was stuff we're done in chapter 4. So you need to review that at this point. Particularly thinking about prepping for the test. Now's the time to go back and relook at chapter 4. Okay, there are 3 tests for validity we need to pay attention to, and so far we've seen 2 of them. First of all, remember from chapter 1, we talked about the concept of validity vis-a-vis syllogisms. Substitution instances is universal test, meaning it can be used on the conditionals and the categoricals alike. Now we've seen the Venn diagrams. That's another test. This one only works on the categorical, so it's not a universal test, but it's a pretty handy test, particularly when you're faced with those 256 different types of categoricals, as opposed to the 4 types of conditionals. And now we're going to have another test, third test of validity, rules and fallacies. And here they are. This is something I will not ask you to memorize for the exam. I will not say fill in the blank, what's the first rule. But what I might do for you is I give you all 5 rules, in the context of saying, okay, I want you to tell me whether this syllogism is valid or not, and use, let's say, 2 methods. And so you might choose to use the substitution instance plus the Venn diagrams, but you might choose to use the Venn diagrams plus rules and fallacies. And if I ask a question like that, I would give you the rules and fallacies on the exam when I ask you to memorize it. What I would want to see is, can you apply them, having them in front of you. And that's, I think that's sufficient to show that you understand the rules and fallacies. Here they are. The middle term has to be distributed at least. Remember distribution, by the way, I said that's going to come back and bite us again, and then bite us in the butt. Here it is. Distribution, when a proposition says something about each and every member of the class indicated by a term, and that term is distributed for that proposition. The middle term must be distributed at least once. If a term is distributed in the conclusion, it must be distributed in the premise. So you can look and see yay or nay, is it distributed in the conclusion? And then if that answer is yay, then you go back and look at least one premise. 2 negative premises not allowed. A negative premise requires a negative conclusion, and a negative conclusion requires a negative premise. And finally, if both premises are universal, the conclusion cannot be particular. Okay? If a categorical syllogism violates a single one of these 5 rules, then it is invalid. So let's work through some examples once again. Let's go to shift back to the standard view, the presenter view. Okay. And alrighty, so let's see. Gets first, Popula. And the S in the conclusion, and the P in the conclusion. Okay, and now our quantifiers, E, oops, is no, and O is some, oops, that's another line. But also some not, remember, some not, and was O here is some, and also not. Okay, and, oops, let's move that. So, yeah. There we go. All right, and so then our figure is 1. So, oops, nope. So M goes here, and M goes here. Figure 1, and so then P here, and S goes here. So, E001, no M are P, some S are not M, some S are not P, and there we go. Let's see what we get. Here's a Venn, and oops, another circle, third circle. Oh, that's pretty good. First try. S and P and M. Okay, no MRP. Okay, if anything is an M, it is not also a P, so that bit within the M circle, which overlaps with the P circle, is going to be empty. Shaded. And some S are not M. If there's anything which is an S, it's not an M. But we don't know which of two bits that is. So here's the S circle. It's outside the M circle, but there's a boundary here, a fence, if you will, between these two bits. So we're going to have to put our X there in such a way that it sits on the fence, that it dangles over into both sectors. What do we have to show? We have to show this S and P. And oops, nope. Okay. Okay, well, if there is an S, there's at least one S, then that has to be not P. So our X is going to have to go into the S circle, but outside the P circle. There's one. So, so does the complex Venn say at least as much as the simple one does? And the answer is no, it doesn't, because the X in the complex one could be in the P circle, but it could be in a bit of S, which is outside the P circle. We don't know. And this is just an illustration with the Venn diagram of that rule that two negative premises are not allowed. If you tried this with any other two negative premise syllogism, you would get the equivalent result. That is, you would result that they are not a valid inference. So again, these are different ways of showing more or less the same point. You should be familiar with the relationship between the rules and the Venn. Let's see here. I'm going to skip over a couple of these. You can do these if you want on your own. Negative conclusion, non-negative premises allowed. But let me just do this one. The particular conclusion, universal premises not allowed. Just to show what happens if you stick in a particular premise where you might have stuck in a universal premise, how that makes a difference. Okay, so once again, I want to see the presenter view. And so, easy bits first. Oops, no. RE. And the S goes here. And the P goes, guess where? And our quantifiers, all. And all. In this case, it's not going to be all again, it's going to be some. Notice that this one is superficially similar to the Barber syllogism in that it has two A's and a figure one, but it doesn't have three A's. It has one particular premise and two universals. Sorry, one particular conclusion, particular proposition in the conclusion, and two universal propositions in the premises. And that's going to make a difference. You're not going to get a particular conclusion universal premises. Okay, see here, figure one again, M and M and P and S. Okay, let's see what happens. we have two universals, doesn't matter which one we use. Let's go ahead. Let's just okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, right. So two universals. We're going to draw our diagram with a shade. All M are P. If anything is an M, then it's going to be a P. So anything which is in the M circle but outside the P circle will be indicated before we shade to indicate that here. And now, if anything is an S, it is an M. So if it's the S circle, it's also the M circle. So here we do this, and here we do this, and this. Okay. Now, let's do our Venn for the conclusion. And in order to draw the conclusion, we have to be able to say some S are P. There's at least circles and lined up, labeled. We have to be able to say if anything is an S, it is, that there's at least one S, and it is a P. Okay, now how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by using an X, aren't we? Because it's a particular proposition. We have to decide where to put that X. But the thing is, do we have an X at all in the complex diagram? No, we don't. There's none in there. The reason is that there isn't any particular premise. Give us an X. We have two universal premises. They give us shades. So where we're going to want to put our X, let's just go ahead and move the line here. We have to be able to say there is something which is both an S and a P. So there is an X, and it fits in the lozenge between the S and P where the S and P overlap. Yeah, but no, there's no way you're going to get any kind of result like that from a from a particular you're going to get a particular conclusion from universal premise. Thing here now. We could say, though, based on this diagram, let's go back to the three circle diagram. We could say all S are P. Okay, if we had the Barber syllogism, we could say for a conclusion all S are P. In which case, then what we would draw is right. Let me just do it down here by the thing here. Let's draw two more. Oops, two more circles here and here, and we label them S P. Suppose we wanted to say that all S are P. Okay, if anything is an S, it's also in the P circle. Then what we would do is to shade this bit of the S and all S or P. And what we find is that, yeah, this one says at least as much as that first three circle diagram we drew here, the AAA1, because we draw the same diagram, the same premises. The AAA1 is we would for the AAI1 if we just substituted all S or P, some S or P. And so that diagram would support the conclusion some S or P, but it will not support the conclusion, never will, never can, some S or P, because it just cannot support a particular conclusion of any kind. That is to say, cannot support any conclusion which requires us to have an X in the two circle diagram, because we've not put an X. We cannot put an X. All we do. So that's some how the Venn diagram sheds a little bit of light on one of the last one of these rules. And again, there are different ways of getting at the same thing. So, bear in mind, there are three different tests for validity. You should be familiar with all three of them and how they apply. The universal test, substitution instances applies to all, and the other two apply to the categoricals in particular, not to the conditionals. The middle term must be distributed at least once. The reason for this has to do with what the middle term do. Our definitions: the middle term is that term which occurs in once in each premise, but never in the conclusion. Distribution is that property of a term whereby the proposition using that term that's something about each and every member of the class denoted by the term question. So the middle term is so called because it mediates, it's midway between the other two terms S and P. But if M is undistributed, in other words, if nothing is said about each M, then S and P might be related to different segments of M, not to the same segment. And this is what we see if we compare the Barbara with the other similar one, AAA2. I always use the microphone there. AAA1 distributes M in the major premise because major premise A distributes the subject term, but AAA2 does not because M is not the subject term in either premise. So AAA2 fails to say whether S and P are related to the same part of the M class. No common ground for relating S and P. The middle term, as it were, fails to do what a middle term should do, which is to mediate. The undistributed middle is a formal fallacy for categoricals in the same way that affirming the consequent is a formal fallacy for conditionals. Okay? All you have to do is just eyeball the form, or eyeball the syllogism in question, and you'll get it. So, rules and fallacies. Once again, not important to memorize these rules, but it is important to understand them. So again, as I said before, it'd be fair game in an exam not to have you memorize these. I mean, I would. No point in doing it. You always look it up if you need to. But if you have it in front of you, you've looked it up, there it is. You should be able to apply it. That would demonstrate sufficient understanding. Okay, well, after all that, with all that under our belts, we've gone through the full course of lectures for Philosophy 8, Deductive Logic. Now we're ready to summarize. So that's what we're going to do in part 13, the next and final lecture in the series, Summary Deductive Logic. Thank you for listening. This has been Michael Cavanaugh. Good day.